heard somebody say once there are two types of people in the world. People who categorize everything into two types and people who don't. And I thought that's a really useful thing to do, because on our categorization, you can categorize trusts a million different ways. So these are just some categories.
We've just done some categories here for you based on either trustee powers or based on the way that a trust is formed. So we're going to go through and talk about these different types of trusts in that way, but just so that you've kind of got it in your mind how it is that we're thinking about them. So there's non-discretionary trusts. So those are trusts where you can also call them fixed interest trusts. Trusts where, thanks Blair, where your trustee doesn't have very many powers. So they have a specific set and no more. Then there are discretionary trusts where trustees have a lot more powers. For example, they have the discretion to pass along income and capital to your beneficiaries, or they maybe don't, which again we're going to get into if it's a fixed interest trust. They have to pay out everything in the trust once the beneficiary turns a certain age, for example. That would be a non-discretionary trust. Then there's also types of trusts based on formation, when they're formed. So there's living trusts, which is kind of weird sounding, but basically that's when, I'm sorry for the typo in there, that's when the person who forms the trust is alive at the time that they form it. Or there's testamentary trusts. So those are trusts that are formed within a will. Okay, so fixed interest trusts.
Yeah, so a fixed interest trust we don't do a lot of because, as I said before, economic forecasts are always wrong, and when we try to predict the future, we're always wrong. But a fixed interest trust, an example of that is hold funds in trust for Johnny until he turns 35. And when Johnny turns 35, he gets the money. Now, he gets the money if he's mature. He gets the money if he's still has the mind of an 18-year-old. He gets the money if he's wanting to buy a Lamborghini and all sorts of things that you wouldn't approve of. So in a fixed interest trust, you're assuming that at 35, Johnny will be old enough to handle the money. But whether he is or not, or when Johnny turns 35, he could be in the middle of a lawsuit in which somebody is suing him for something. And now that's his asset, and that becomes available to the creditors who, if they win the lawsuit, they can then take that asset. So you never know what's going to happen in the future at a specific point in time, and that's the weakness of the fixed interest trust. Now, some people still like them, but the downside of the fixed interest trust is the future may not be as you think it's going to be.
Less flexibility.
Yeah, which is where discretionary trusts come in. Because you don't have to forecast the future, you let the trustee decide, is this an appropriate time to give some money to Johnny? Or do you want to keep it inside the trust until things settle down?
Yeah, well, that's it.
Okay. So beneficiary receives the distribution only if, when, and to the extent the trustee decides to make the distribution. So in this case, the beneficiaries are probably Johnny and his sister and his descendants. And the trustee says, okay, well, Johnny's starting a business, so I think I'll distribute some property to him so we can use it to start the business. Or the trustee says, well, Johnny's starting a business, I'll lend him some money. And if the business doesn't work out, then at least I've got the security, I'll take security on the assets of the business. If the business doesn't work out, I'm a secured creditor. So I can protect Johnny from bad things happening and sort of run interference for him because I can use that strategy because I'm separate from Johnny. I'm taking back, I'm like a bank. I'm lending him money, take back security. If things don't work out, then there's still some assets there that they haven't all gone. So the nice thing is that there's a lot of flexibility to deal with changing circumstances because you have no idea what the world is going to be like in 10, 15 years. I didn't even know what the world's going to be like in 6 months. As we've seen in the world, on the world stage, an attack happens in Paris. It it changes people's attitudes. And that happens in, Johnny meets somebody and it doesn't work out. If the assets are in the trust, they're less likely to be divided on a marriage or a relationship split up. It's not just marriage in BC, it's common law couples now have property rights. So it's a way of protecting somebody who might need protection. And now, it's a double-edged sword. The more flexibility you give to the trustee, the less control you have over what the trustee does. So again, you've got to make sure that the trustee has good judgment, has sympathy and empathy for the beneficiary, and will act in the best interest of the beneficiary. Because whenever you're in control of assets, there's an inherent conflict of interest there. Because you're in control, so there's always the possibility of using the control for the wrong purpose, and that's almost inherent. Now, you'll hear a term called a Henson Trust, and a Henson Trust is just a discretionary trust that was used in Ontario for a beneficiary who was on government assistance. And various governments have various rules that apply to government assistance for people who have disabilities. And in Ontario, if the person owned more than a certain level of assets, there was no government assistance. So Mr. Henson, in his will, set up a trust for the benefit of his disabled daughter and appointed a trustee, and the assets were held in trust, did not belong to the daughter, but she was a beneficiary. So the trustee could buy things for the daughter, could pay the daughter's rent, could use those funds for the benefit of the daughter. And the Ontario government said, well, that's as if she owns them, so we're not going to give her government assistance. And again, in these situations, there's not enough, there's never enough money. So it was a way of giving a little bit extra to the daughter, but also allowing her to have the government assistance. It went to court, and the court concluded that, well, no, that's right. She does not own that money. She's eligible to receive distributions, assistance from the trustee, but the trustee, there are other beneficiaries, so the trustee might decide to give money to those other beneficiaries. She's not guaranteed anything from the trust. And the court decided that no, government assistance was still available. So discretionary trusts are used often to protect an income stream from government assistance because, I think in BC, if you have more than $200,000 of assets, you're cut off government assistance. Well, if say the parents die and their main asset is their house and it's in Vancouver, so the house sells for $1 million, well, that's more than $200,000. But if that fund is kept inside the trust, that can be used for the benefit to supplement the government assistance. And if the government assistance runs out at some point, then you still have the funds in the trust. You're always saying, okay, what can I fall back on? Henson Trust is just another word for a fully discretionary trust where the trustee legally doesn't have to give anything to the beneficiary. But again, you're going to appoint a trustee who's got empathy for the beneficiary, who's going to run interference for the beneficiary, do the best for the beneficiary, and that person is going to know how to how to use the trust for the benefit of that person. So not going to give cash payments to the beneficiary, going to use the trust assets to pay things that the beneficiary would have to pay for, like rent, things like that. Oh, we're back to trust types based on formation. So that's just, you can set this up during your lifetime. You can set it up in your will. Now, most people are going to set it up in the will because that's the point where they can't use the assets themselves for the benefit of their child. But there are some circumstances where if, for whatever reasons, you could set it up during lifetime as well.